A pair of white patent leather shoes, size 2T. That is what Nora Jean Wallace's mother, Claudette, carried in her purse every single day for 3 years. Not because Nora Jean could wear them, but because Nora Jean had picked them out herself from a catalog on a Tuesday afternoon in February of 2020, pointed at them with one finger, and said, "Those ones, Mama, for when I dance." Nora Jean was 5 years old. She had been born without legs below both knees, a bilateral congenital limb difference that her surgeons at Cincinnati Children's Hospital had explained to Claudette in a room with beige walls and a box of tissues on the table when Nora Jean was 11 hours old. By the time Nora Jean Wallace stepped onto the Family Feud stage in Cincinnati on April 4, 2023, on 2 custom prosthetic legs painted to look like pink ballet slippers, she was 8 years old, and she had been dancing for 14 months. When the music started and Nora Jean moved to the center of that stage and began, arms up, chin lifted, completely alone in the spotlight, Steve Harvey took 3 steps backward. His hand went to his chest. His shoulders rose once and did not come back down. And then the most famous game show host in America sat down, right there on the stage floor, put his face in his hands, and wept. It was a Wednesday in Cincinnati. The Wallace family, Claudette, 41, her husband Bernard, 44, Nora Jean, 8, Nora Jean's older brother Theo, age 13, and Claudette's mother, Miss Vera, age 67, had left their house in Westwood at 6:15 a.m. to make the 8:30 call time. Miss Vera had made biscuits the night before and wrapped them in foil. Bernard had checked the minivan's tire pressure twice. Nora Jean had slept the whole drive in her booster seat with her prosthetics still on, her pink-painted legs crossed at the ankle, the way children cross their legs when they feel completely at ease in their own bodies. She had not always felt that way. The competing family, the Okafor Bells from Dayton, were 5 cousins spanning 3 decades in age. The oldest was 58, the youngest was 22, and they arrived doing a group prayer in the parking lot that the production crew could see through the window. The youngest cousin, a woman named Jade, had brought a handmade sign that read, "Okafor Bells Run This," in glitter marker. Steve saw it during the pre-show walk and laughed out loud. It was that kind of morning, easy, warm, the studio humming the way it hums when everyone in it is glad to be there. Claudette had told no one at the studio about Nora Jean's dancing. She had not mentioned it in the pre-interview. She had not told the segment producers. She had not told Bernard's mother, who watched the show every day and would have made it into something. She had kept it the way she kept most things about Nora Jean, close, careful, hers to give when the moment was right. But nobody in that studio knew what it had taken to get Nora Jean to that stage. Nora Jean Wallace was born at 11:42 p.m. on a Thursday in October 2014, 6 weeks early, at UC Medical Center in Cincinnati. Claudette had known since the 20-week ultrasound that there would be limb differences. The maternal fetal medicine specialist had used the phrase bilateral fibular hemimelia, a condition in which the fibula bones do not develop, taking with them varying degrees of the foot and lower leg. In Nora Jean's case, both legs ended mid-calf. The specialist had been kind. She had also been very precise, which Claudette later said was the kindest thing she could have been. Claudette spent the remaining 20 weeks reading everything. She wanted to know everything before Nora Jean arrived, so that when Nora Jean arrived, Claudette would not spend 1 minute of her daughter's life being afraid of her. She spent none. The first prosthetic fittings began when Nora Jean was 11 months old. Pediatric prosthetics for a bilateral below-knee limb difference in a growing child require refitting every 4 to 6 months, as the child grows. Each set of prosthetics, fitted by a certified prosthetist and covered under Claudette and Bernard's employer-sponsored insurance plan, carried a cost of between $6,400 and $11,800 per limb per fitting, depending on the complexity of the socket and the activity level of the components. For Nora Jean, whose activity level from the moment she started walking at 14 months was classified by her prosthetist as exceptional, each bilateral fitting cost between $14,000 and $22,000. The insurance plan covered 80% after deductible in years when the annual maximum, $18,500, had not been reached. In years when it had, which was every year from Nora Jean's first fitting onward, it covered nothing further. The annual out-of-pocket gap ranged from $4,200 in a light year to $9,800 in a heavy one. Over 8 years, the Wallace family had paid $51,400 in prosthetic costs beyond what insurance covered. They had paid it through Bernard's overtime at the warehouse, through Claudette's second job doing medical billing from home on weekend mornings, and through a GoFundMe campaign Theo had set up himself at age 11 without telling his parents, which raised $3,700 from strangers in 9 days. And that wasn't even the part that made the crews stop working. The dancing had started as physical therapy. Nora Jean's prosthetist, a man named David Kwan, who had been fitting pediatric prosthetics for 19 years, recommended rhythmic movement activities in 2021 to help Nora Jean develop proprioception, the body's sense of its own position in space, in her prosthetic legs. He gave Claudette a list of options: swimming, gymnastics, dance. Nora Jean chose dance before Claudette finished reading the list out loud. She said, "Dance! The one with the music and the arms." They enrolled her at a studio in Westwood called Step by Step, run by a woman named Miss Gloria, who had been teaching recreational dance for 26 years and had never had a student with bilateral prosthetics. Miss Gloria said on the phone that she would need a week to research. She called back in 4 days. She said, "We'll figure it out together." They did. Over 14 months, Nora Jean learned to move in a way that was entirely and specifically hers, a style built around what her prosthetics could do, around the axis of her hips and the swing of her arms, around music and momentum and the pure physical fact of her own body choosing joy over limitation. Miss Gloria said at Nora Jean's first recital in March of 2023, "She taught me more than I taught her. She always does." Nora Jean had told Claudette, 2 weeks before the Family Feud taping, that she wanted to dance on the show. Not perform. That was not how she said it. She said, "Mama, I want to dance on the stage. Not because it's a show, just because it would be a big stage and I've never done a big stage." Claudette had looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she said, "Let me see if I can make that happen." She had not asked the producers. She had simply brought the shoes, the white patent leather size 2Ts that Nora Jean had picked from the catalog, in her purse, and waited. Nora Jean did not know her mother was carrying them. She thought she had left them at home. Claudette's plan, such as it was to ask Steve Harvey directly if Nora Jean could have 2 minutes between rounds. She had rehearsed how to say it 4 times in the minivan on the way. She had not rehearsed what she would do if he said no. The audience thought they understood what kind of morning this was. They were completely wrong. What Claudette had not told anyone, not Bernard, not Miss Gloria, not her own mother, Miss Vera, was what Nora Jean had said to her on a night the previous November, after a difficult day at school during which a boy in her class had pointed at her legs and said something that made Nora Jean go quiet for the rest of the afternoon. Claudette had found her sitting on her bedroom floor that evening, holding the catalog page she had torn out with the white patent leather shoes on it, the page gone soft at the folds from handling. Nora Jean had looked up and said, "Mama, am I still going to be able to dance when I'm big?" Claudette had sat down on the floor beside her. She had said, "Yes, baby, you are going to dance everywhere." Nora Jean had looked at the page for another moment. Then she said, "Okay, I just needed to make sure somebody knew that was the plan." What happened between the first and second rounds of the feud was something no producer at that show had ever been asked to accommodate, and something none of them would ever forget. The Wallaces won the first round by 11 points. The studio was up. Bernard was hollering. Theo was doing something with his arms that was not quite a dance and not quite a victory celebration, but somewhere between the two. Miss Vera touched her hand to her chest and said, "Thank you, Jesus," loud enough for the front 3 rows to hear. In the 2-minute reset between rounds, while the board was being cleared and the producers were shuffling cards, Claudette walked to the edge of the stage. She caught Steve Harvey's eye. He came to her. She said, quietly enough that only he could hear, "Mr. Harvey, my daughter wants to dance. She's been working on it for 14 months. She just wants 2 minutes on this stage. It would mean everything to her." She reached into her purse. She took out the white patent leather shoes. She held them up. She said, "She picked these out when she was 5. She called them her dancing shoes. She doesn't know I brought them." Steve Harvey looked at the shoes. He looked at Claudette. He looked across the stage at Nora Jean, who was standing in the family lineup adjusting her left prosthetic with the matter-of-fact focus of a person doing something she has done 10,000 times. He said, "Give me 30 seconds. He walked to the production booth. The floor director met him halfway. There was a brief exchange, 2 sentences from Steve, 1 from the director, then the director nodded once and spoke into his headset. The studio music changed. The overhead lights shifted. A single spotlight, wide and warm, opened in the center of the stage. Steve walked back to Claudette. He said, "She's got the stage." He took the white patent leather shoes from Claudette's hands. He carried them himself across the stage to Nora Jean. He crouched down, all 6 feet 2 inches of him folding down to her level, and he held the shoes out. He said, "Your mama brought these for you. She's been carrying them all morning." Nora Jean looked at the shoes. Then she looked at her mother across the stage. Claudette had both hands pressed to her mouth. Nora Jean looked back at Steve. She said, "Are those mine?" Steve said, "They always were." The studio fell completely silent. Nora Jean took the shoes. She did not put them on. She could not wear them over her prosthetics, and she knew that, and it did not matter, because that had never been the point. She held them to her chest for 3 seconds. Then she handed them back to Steve and said, "Hold those for me. I need my arms." She walked to the center of the spotlight. She handed her mother a small nod, the kind that means, "I'm ready." Claudette nodded back. The music started. It was Lovely Day by Bill Withers, a choice Nora Jean had made 3 weeks earlier when Miss Gloria asked her what she would dance to if she could dance anywhere. Nora Jean Wallace raised both arms above her head. Her chin came up, and she began. She danced for 2 minutes and 11 seconds. The studio fell completely silent for the first 10 seconds. The held-breath silence of people who have just seen something they were not prepared to see. And then it broke open into the loudest sound that stage had produced all week. But Nora Jean did not look at the audience. She danced the way she always danced, like the music was a private conversation between herself and something larger than the room. Steve Harvey took 3 steps backward. His hand went to his chest. His shoulders rose once, and then he sat down on the stage floor and put his face in his hands. The crew did not try to hide it. The boom operator lowered her equipment and put her hand to her throat. The floor director, a man who had worked in live television for 18 years, turned to the wall. Two camera operators kept rolling because it was their job and because they understood, in the way that professionals understand the rarest moments, that this was something that needed to be caught. When the music stopped, the studio fell completely silent one final time. Norah Jean walked to Steve. She looked at him on the floor. She said, "Mr. Steve, are you okay?" Steve looked up. His face was open in the way that faces are when the performance has gone entirely and what is left is just the person. He said, "Baby, I am better than okay." He stood up. He smoothed his jacket. He held the white shoes out to her. He said, "These are yours. Don't leave here without them." Steve did not reach for his cue card. He stood in the center of that stage for a long moment with the white shoes in his hands, looking at Norah Jean, and then he looked at Claudette, and then he looked at the floor, and then he looked up at the lights the way a man looks up when he is collecting himself from a great height. He said, "I have been on this stage for 27 years. I have laughed on this stage, and I have cried on this stage, and I have watched people win things that changed their lives. But I have never, not once, watched a child teach me something in 2 minutes and 11 seconds that I have been trying to learn my whole life." He paused. He looked at Norah Jean. "What is it called, when you just decide that the thing you cannot do is going to become the thing you do?" Norah Jean thought about it. Then she said, "Dancing." The audience laughed and cried at the same time, which is the hardest thing a room full of strangers can do together, and the best. Steve said, "Let me tell you something." He looked at Claudette and Bernard. 30 years ago, I was living in a 1976 Ford Tempo. 3 years. I had nothing. No house, no address, no plan. The only promise I made in that car was that if God ever got me out of it, I would spend every day I had left showing up for people who were carrying something heavy. I have been trying to keep that promise for 30 years. He looked at Norah Jean. This morning, she kept it from me. The studio fell completely silent. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the booth. He said, "Get me a line to David." In 12 seconds, a phone was in his hand. He called David Kwan, Norah Jean's prosthetist, live on the studio speakers. He explained the situation in 2 sentences. Then he said, "Every fitting Norah Jean needs from this point forward. Every one. My foundation covers it, all of it, for as long as she needs." David Kwan said after a pause, "Mr. Harvey, that's years of fittings." Steve said, "I know what it is. Do we have a deal?" David Kwan said, "We have a deal." Bernard Wallace grabbed the podium with both hands. Claudette made a sound, one single sound that filled the room. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the camera. He said, "To every parent watching at home right now who has been told that something your child cannot do is going to define them, I need you to hear this. Your child is not defined by what they cannot do. Your child is defined by what they decide to do with what they have." I just watched an 8-year-old girl prove that in 2 minutes and 11 seconds. Share this with every parent you know. The Okafor Bell family, every one of the 5 cousins, from 58-year-old Auntie Bisi to 22-year-old Jade with the glitter sign, walked as a group across the stage and stood in a ring around Norah Jean, and they clapped. Not for the show. Not because a producer told them to. They clapped because they had watched something true happen in front of them, and they did not know any other way to answer it. Both families received full prizes. The production company announced that afternoon that Norah Jean's dance footage would be donated to the Amputee Coalition for use in their pediatric outreach materials. The first time in Family Feud history that a contestant's moment had been formally shared with a medical advocacy organization. The clip, Norah Jean raising her arms, Steve sitting down on the floor, Steve saying, "These are yours, don't leave here without them," was posted at 10:41 p.m. the night of the taping. By 4 a.m., it had 11.2 million views. By the end of the week, it had 389 million, making it the fastest-growing clip in Family Feud's digital history. The hashtag #SheNeedsHerArms reached 2.1 billion impressions in 12 days and trended in 34 countries. Lovely Day by Bill Withers re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 for the first time in 11 years on the strength of streams generated by the clip. Steve Harvey spoke about the moment on The Ellen DeGeneres Show, one of Ellen's final guest appearances before the show ended, and said, "I sat down because my legs didn't work anymore. That's the only explanation I have." He held up his hand to show it was still unsteady. The audience made a sound he later described as the warmest thing he had ever heard in a room. David Kwan, Norah Jean's prosthetist, gave an interview to Cincinnati's local NBC affiliate in which he said, "In 19 years I have never had a patient like her. She doesn't treat the prosthetics as a limitation. She treats them as instruments, like a musician treats an instrument." He was asked how he felt about the Harvey Foundation covering her future fittings. He said, "I feel like the right people are finally in the room." Norah Jean Wallace was featured on the cover of People magazine's Heroes Among Us issue in June 2023, at age 8, the youngest cover subject in the issue's 31-year history. The photograph showed her on a stage, not the Family Feud stage, but the stage at Step by Step Dance Studio in Westwood, with both arms above her head and her pink-painted prosthetics catching the light. Miss Gloria was standing in the wings in the background, both hands pressed to her heart. In September 2023, Steve Harvey formally established the Norah Jean Fund through his foundation, providing prosthetic fitting coverage and adaptive athletics funding for children with limb differences whose families faced insurance gaps. In its first 10 months, the fund served 1,900 families across 24 states, covering $8.7 million in prosthetic costs. The fund's application portal received 22,000 submissions in its first 72 hours, a volume the foundation's director described as unlike anything we have ever processed. Theo Wallace, 13 at the time of the taping, updated his GoFundMe page the week after the clip went viral. He changed the description to one sentence: "She doesn't need this anymore, but somebody else does." He redirected all future donations to the Norah Jean Fund. The page raised an additional $61,000 in 30 days. Norah Jean danced in her first formal recital at Step by Step in November 2023. She performed a solo to Lovely Day. Miss Gloria introduced her from the side of the stage. She said, "This young woman danced on national television in April and sat a very tall man down on the floor. Tonight, she's going to do it again, except the floor stays where it is." The audience, which included Claudette, Bernard, Miss Vera, Theo, David Kwan, and 2 producers from Family Feud who had driven from Atlanta without being asked, laughed until the theater shook. The white patent leather shoes are in a shadow box on the wall of Norah Jean's bedroom, next to the catalog page she tore out when she was 5. The page has gone soft at the folds. The shoes still have the store sticker on the sole. They have never been worn. On April 4, 2023, an 8-year-old girl with pink-painted prosthetic legs walked to the center of a spotlight on a national television stage, handed a man her instructions. "Hold those, I need my arms," and danced. And the man sat down on the floor because his legs stopped working, which is what happens sometimes when something is so purely itself that the body cannot hold it upright. The white shoes are on the wall now. The page is still soft at the folds. She picked them out at 5 years old and said, "For when I dance." She did not say if, she said when. And she meant it, and she waited, and she worked, and when the stage was finally there, she raised her arms and she went. Some people decide the thing, and then they build toward it, quietly, one lesson at a time, until the day the world is finally big enough for what they always knew they were going to do. That is not courage. That is something older than courage. That is a child who simply never accepted the smaller version of herself that the world kept trying to hand her. If this story lives in you, subscribe right now. We find these moments every week, the ones that almost didn't get told. Share this with someone raising a child who has been told what they cannot do. And leave a comment. What did a child teach you, in one moment, without meaning to, that you have carried ever since? Write it below.